As a Quaker in the early 21st century, I am acutely aware that I have inherited and am an active participant in a tradition that has benefited from centuries of exploitation and domination. That is not something that we usually advertise and talk about openly, but I think that we need to.
Quakerism was founded in industrializing England in the 17th century and spread around the world as English colonialism spread around the world. And that's a really integral part of our history.
Early Quakers didn't condemn slavery. George Fox encouraged people to treat their slaves well, to educate them, to preach the gospel to them. William Penn owned slaves, but already by 1688, Quakers and Mennonites in Germantown, Pennsylvania, then a community just outside of Philadelphia, had gathered to protest slavery as white Europeans, appalled coming to the Americas to escape religious persecution in Europe, to find that Quakers owned slaves.
I think a lot of Quaker meetings right now, over the past 5-10 years, some for much longer, have been going through the process of reckoning with the overwhelming whiteness of Quakerism and the history of racism within Quakerism as a faith, which I think it's an interesting study in the white psyche, because Quakers for so long have, I think, ridden on the knowledge that early friends, or not early friends, but early friends in the United States were abolitionists. And of course that's true, and I look to those friends when I'm trying to understand how to live my life. But there's also Quaker history of violence against Indigenous people, keeping Black people out of meetings. And so I think that process of reckoning is really important, and everyone's at a different stage in that process, and every meeting's at a different stage in that process.
Some people think of racism as having an opinion that people of a different race are in some way inherently inferior to the people of my race, and that inferiority justifies having laws and social practices that disadvantage those people. If a Quaker were to define racism that way, they could very honestly say, I'm not racist. I have been helped recently at a meeting for business. We were working on this, and there was a definition of white supremacy. The part that I recall was a setting in which the decisions are mainly made by white people. And I thought, well, I can see that. And I can see that in a room full of Quakers, most of whom are white, if a person of color has a different view, it's very difficult to get that view into focus in the decision-making process. And I know of instances, I can see instances in my meeting when that was true.
The idea that there's that of God in everyone informs my understanding that to exploit another person is to sacrifice your humanity. And so doing work that counters that is, I think, the only way to have integrity to my faith as a Quaker, and to have integrity to my understanding of God. Because if I believe that there is that of God in everyone, and then I go around engaging with or profiting off of systems that exploit others, then I'm I can say I believe that, but I mean, we're supposed to let our lives speak, and so I wouldn't be doing that.
Those of us who have benefited from white supremacist, heterosexist patriarchy need to call that out and name it and do something about dismantling that, not in the future and not only through our electoral choices, but in the here and now.
I think there's a lot of different types of work that needs to be done towards racial justice and towards undoing racism within our own communities as well as the wider world and within ourselves. And I think different folks are called to different pieces of that work. So for some folks, doing racial justice work may mean seeking out books written by authors of color about systemic racism and about the psychology of race, and perhaps finding some folks to read those books with them and doing some work within themselves. And other folks are going to be called to go and stand beside organizations in their communities that are led by people of color that are trying to change some aspect of our social structures that are racist. And both those things and many other things are important types of work. I think that particularly for white friends, when addressing racial justice, it's important to admit that we don't have all the answers, and we have a set of lies that we've been taught by our society, and that is not our fault, and yet it is something that we need to work on challenging within ourselves and within our communities.
How can I role model for my own children? How can I role model for my students and for my spouse what it looks like to live in a world that's not about domination and control? What can I do that shows people that people of European descent are not better and that my particular aesthetic preferences are not superior, that I honor other people's choices? How can I expand my world, the world of my friend group, so that I include people from all over the world, so that for me and for everyone in my life, it becomes increasingly normal to think of all people from all of the world's communities as part of my tribe, so that we are not a small insular tribe. So for Quakers in the early 21st century to take on this challenge is unbelievably difficult, heartbreaking on a daily basis, and exactly what we need to be doing. So I'm grateful to be alive to do the work.
Thanks for watching this QuakerSpeak video. We release a new video every Thursday. You can watch all our videos in this playlist here. You can subscribe to our channel by clicking this button here. You can support us through our Patreon here. Thanks again for watching, and have a happy Thursday.